we have Desiree Tullos from Oregon State University is going to be talking about food webs and other interesting items. So, Jake, sorry about that. So Desiree, go ahead and share your slides and take it away.
Right.
All right.
Thanks, Ryan. Does that, you see the slide deck?
Full screen, looks great.
Excellent, thank you. All right, well, thanks, Randy, for getting us organized. It's good to be back at KBMP, even if it's remotely. I'm going to try to briefly introduce a new project that we're just launching with funding from Oregon Sea Grant. It's a collaboration between OSU and the Yurok tribe. The focus on water quality, food webs, and equitable decisions. So I'll take a minute to explain what that means. But first, I want to introduce our project team. We've got a bunch of folks from OSU here, from a range of different departments, from microbiology to anthropology to including extension. We have Laurel Genzoli, who really needs no introduction. She's the primary producer rock star of the Klamath. And then a bunch of folks also from the Yurok tribe, DJ, Mike, Barry, and Brooke, all working together to develop what we've, this kind of ambitious project that we are embarking on over the next 4 years. So our justification, at least how we pitched it to Sea Grant, is all around really water quality, and it's somewhat underappreciated role in the basin. I mean, it's critical and it's complex, and it already influences the system now, and is likely to continue to influence the system once the reservoirs are gone, because they store sediment and nutrients. But it might impact the system in a different way. So when we think, well, at least for a lot of people, when we think of water quality, we think of this sort of the aquatic graveyard look of the reservoirs in the basin currently. And the aesthetics of it is important, but the visual cue aspect of it. But to us, the thing that we really want to focus on is how do those water quality impacts things that we care about? Things like primary producers. Now, if you're not Laurel or someone who has a deep value and passion around primary producers, you might not know why you should care about them, but they do impact water quality, things like dissolved oxygen and pH, in some cases, small scales temperature, but they also are the base of the food web. So, you know, they feed the invertebrates, they feed salmon, but they also play, we suspect, an important role in the sea Shasta infection cycle. And so this is just an image of a salmon that's been infected with sea Shasta, which we all know infects up to 90% of juveniles in the system. And a key part of that life cycle is this annelid host. It's the aquatic worm that hosts sea Shasta. And in particular, we're really interested in what's going on here in the gut. So we had a seed grant to try to unpack some of the details of how water quality, excuse me, suspended material and annelids might be linked. And the key piece about this is that these are suspension feeders. So they're essentially just, they're just essentially filtering whatever's in the water column, and they're eating it. And what our preliminary data pretty suggested in a pretty compelling way is that what they're actually eating depends on where they're located in the river, whether they're just downstream, for example, of Iron Gate Dam, where they're getting a lot of organic material, essentially being fed a lot of nutrient-rich stuff. They were fatter, they were bigger, they were plump and juicy, they were more fecund, versus as you get farther downstream. We presented that stuff at KBMP last spring or fall, probably last spring. Anyway, there does appear to be a link, and it's quite compelling. But they also use that material to build their cases. So there's definitely this connection between the water quality, what's in the what's suspended in the material, and essentially the ability of these annelids to thrive. And so that's part of the story that we're really interested in with dam removal. And then I just threw in this microscopic figure of these annelids, maybe to give you nightmares, or else just to really appreciate how tiny these creatures are, but also how they can be so effective at filtering stuff out of the water column. So just as a reminder, the Klamath dams store a bunch of sediment. It's around 13 million cubic yards. That's about half of what was stored at the Elwha, which is, I think, 27 million cubic yards. But the big difference between these two, the big difference between these two is that at the Elwha, it was sand and gravel. Whereas at the Klamath, it's really fine material plus a bunch of organic material. So those nutrients, carbon, those are going to play an important role in the food web following dam removal. So the broad goal is to try to bring together these ideas of water quality, the food web, and people and decisions on the river in a way that builds partnerships, advances science, provides some important educational experiences, really brings in indigenous knowledge, and supports equitable decisions. We have 3 big objectives. I'm going to talk about a fraction of those, but I just want to introduce you to what we're doing, because some of you might be involved in some of the focus groups and interviews that we're doing, that we'll be doing through the project. But our first objective here, and this is where I'm going to really focus today, is on the ecological processes related to water quality in the food web. But we also have a big component related to socio-cultural processes, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second. The second part is around developing and testing inclusive decision processes. And what I mean by this is essentially building a bunch of models. This is based on work that Jim Peterson has led in the Basin and a lot of other places. But essentially, this is getting at the question of like, what actions you might prioritize if you follow, for example, like a top-down or bottom-up decision strategy. For example, if you followed something that the Klamath or the Yurok tribe might use as a decision process versus conservation advocates versus Bureau of Reclamation. How would you, based on how you prioritize things and how you structure your decisions, how might you end up making different decisions about how to manage water quality in the landscape? So it's pretty esoteric, but in reality is actually a quite simple process. Just hard to explain. And then finally, we have a bunch of research and engagement activities planned. You'll see us in the river for the next 4 years. All right, this is the summary plot that's trying to show how all these parts go together. For the last couple slides, I'm going to focus just really on this green box, but I want you to get a sense of how they all sort of plug together. So the work that we're going to be doing on the ecological side involves developing some new data and some new models. Brian Till, Brooke Thompson at the Yurok tribe, they're going to be working on these cultural models, doing interviews with tribal elders and leadership, but also doing some interviews with stakeholders in the basin to understand how they understand the river, what's their experience of water quality, what are their ideas for how to manage. So very much a sort of cultural version of people's understanding of water quality in the system. So we'll take the blue box and the teal box, we'll mash them together in this structured decision-making box, this pink box. And then from there, what the plan is to combine all that information sort of like in a layer cake structured decision-making approach to ask questions. So for example, you might want to know if you were to, reduce cyanotoxins in the river, would it be more effective to restore 1,000 acres of wetland or install controlled drainage at some irrigation drain canals? So we can actually start to simulate different water quality management scenarios and run them through the system and evaluate the impacts on things like commercial or recreational fishing or fish disease risk or recreation. So that's the big picture of what we're trying to get to. As we zoom into the details, and I'm focusing now just on the ecological outcomes, the things we said we would do and that we're working towards now are to develop some new data and models on how streamflow, water quality, primary producers, and fish disease risk via the annelids, how those interact. So we have numerical models of that based on existing data and then data we collect throughout the dam removal process. And then simulating water quality management strategies to see how those then translate into effects on primary producers. And leaving it there. And this is this work is all summarizing our sub team, which is made up of Laurel, Genzoli, Julie, Alexander, and I. So I'm presenting on behalf of sort of the broader group, but these are all ideas that Laurel and Julie especially contributed to. And one of the things, especially with water quality, that we've really struggled with is how do you take something that's really complex, this web of interactions around water quality, and how do we focus it enough so we can actually learn something? And so a place I always like to start with is a conceptual model. This is the beginning of a herindogram, which I stopped at, but just to illustrate some of the interactions that we're trying to sort of unpack. And this is just associated with the sediment release with the dam removal. We can do the same thing with all these other factors that will be changing with the dam removal. But then that translates, into these physiochemical changes, which then leads to primary producer changes and potential for disease. So it quickly becomes really complicated, and to the extent that you maybe are not able to say anything about the system. And so our goal has really been trying to focus that, to not create something that's so complex that it essentially is of no value. So trying to get towards simplicity. With that framing in mind, these are the hypotheses that we're proposing. And I deliberately put together a short presentation. I'm hoping that we can have some conversation, feedback, what identification things we missed, but this is sort of where we're starting, or where we've gotten to with our hypotheses. Okay, so the first one is the hypothesis that winter scour sets the organisms. And by that, I mean how much winter flow you get, both the magnitude and the timing, controls how many primary producers are out there and who is out there, but also the annelid hosts. And so this is stuff that Laurel and Julie have already seen on the landscape, but we want to be able to build the models to demonstrate that. And then the second hypothesis is that in the absence of scour from either water quality, magnitude of flows and or sediment like sand that can also scour the sediments, that water quality then becomes a key control. And we're really focusing on the nutrients and water clarity because those appear to have a key control on primary production. This is what the hypothesis I was alluding to earlier, that those primary producers who you have in the water feed those annelids. So if you're down, we saw that downstream of Yreka Dam, they were bigger, they were juicier, according to Julie. So the quality and quantity of food that they get definitely influences their ability to thrive. So being able to demonstrate this and build models of it is an important part. And these are all sort of pre-dam removal baseline expectations. And then with dam removal, we expect that there may be, well, we don't expect big changes in the winter flows, that there may be some additional scour due to sediment supply. The reservoirs have trapped sediment. A lot of that is fine sediment, but not all of it. Some of that includes material coming from the tributaries. And so that sand and other slightly coarser material could increase scour of the macrophytes and of the annelids. The second is that we expect there's potential for reduced base flow, and that can have different effects on the primary producers versus the annelids. From a primary production perspective, we expect that gross primary production could increase associated with higher nutrient levels, but that the annelids could decrease because we've done some habitat suitability analysis that indicates the lower depths, lower velocities are actually not good conditions or worse conditions for the annelids. So potentially higher rates of production, but lower biomass of annelids. And then our last two hypotheses here are a little loose, a little vague, frankly, just because we're still working on them. And so we expect that these changes in nutrient concentrations, and particularly and also water clarity, are going to translate into changes in primary producers and annelids. But we're still trying to unpack and disentangle sort of the biggest, sort of most important threads related to that. Similarly, with management decisions, quite vague, and we're still trying to understand how management decisions impact the food web. But we have a pretty clear sense that from like a landscape ecology perspective, that there has to be some spatial orientation to these management actions to identify sort of which ones are likely to be most effective in terms of modifying production and annelids. So those are the hypotheses that we're throwing out there and continuing to work on. We're continuing to revise those. We want to locate them spatially, locate them in space. We've been working to summarize what existing data sets are out there and identify what further data sets we need. One of the things that Laurel has convinced us of is the need for some higher frequency sampling within a season of the primary producers that could tell us a lot since the turnover is so fast. And then we'll hopefully get our study plan together in time for the spring so we can get back out on and in the river. I'm so excited to share this project with you. We're interested in engagement by folks, whoever has interest in the water quality food web dimension. We want to connect. We will hopefully connect to the science workshop coming up. but also just, I did, like I said, deliberately made this short so we could hopefully have some conversation now about what we might have missed. In the grand scheme of things, the water quality, I think, is quite important, and we're trying to just disentangle just the parts that we can within the budget that we have. But yeah, I want to make sure we're not missing anything in terms of people and perspectives and information. So I'll stop and yeah, hopefully have questions or some discussion. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Desiree. Yeah, this was a question that I was about to ask from Eli. Why are base flows and spring flushing flows, oops, sorry, that disappeared, expected to be lower after dam removal?
Well, I don't know that we're expecting spring flushing flows necessarily to change. I have had conversations with folks in the basin who have speculated about it, but I'm not in a place to speculate myself. But the base flows have been in a couple of studies, and I also did a gauge analysis to verify this, are expected to change because those reservoirs, while they're never had the intention of storing flood flows, they do store flows for hydroelectric production. And so base flows in the lowest part of the year, without that storage, without the production or the storage for hydroelectric production, are likely to drop. And I've seen that in, yeah, like I said, in a couple of studies, and also demonstrate that with some gauge analysis of upstream and downstream of the dams. So it's really just associated with the small amount of storage that they have currently. Essentially, the carryover storage from the spring.
Yeah. Does anyone from NOAA on the line have any comments about that? Because there's still the existing biop that, has been based on Iron Gate, as far as I'm aware. Chauncey. And feel free to raise your hand if you're online and have a question.
Yeah, what I was going to say about the baseflow question is it was modeled in the secretarial determination. Blair Greiman and others did the modeling. And we have without the reservoirs, and it's definitely tied into the biops. So maybe you have an updated thought on it, but during late summer base flow, and it's especially kind of late summer, Clayton might have something to say about it too, then we do see in the model results that have been out so far that lower base flow. And then we have the opportunity to for flows to increase pretty rapidly. Another thing that goes with that is a more normal thermal regime. So if you have the lower flows, the temperatures will respond more rapidly too.
So, Chuck, this is Mike, and I'd say that the base flows are a product of the water management plan that's implemented in the upper basin, and the only difference that's going to happen pre and post dam removal is the compliance point at which you would measure is going to be Keno instead of Iron Gate, and Iron Gate will become another midwinter gauge. There's no reason why the base flows would be lower unless it was chosen for them to be lower through a water management plan, or chosen for them to be higher. In other words, it's a product of the management of the water system above there, with the really the control point being Link River Dam. So the dam removal itself by itself will not have an impact. It's the decisions that are made post dam removal that will have an impact, and they could lower base flows, they could be the same, they could be higher, but it'll be a product of a post dam removal water management plan.
And is that set forward anywhere in writing?
You mean what, that it could go either way? Is
just
that
the change, the change in point to Keno, and kind of minimum flows for the biop and everything?
Well, it's something that Reclamation has been working on, but there's nothing in writing yet.
Getting close to time. Okay, Clayton, I see you have a comment. Do you have a question as well? You have your hand raised?
I do, and thank you. Desiree, I was wondering if you sort of highlighted in your short presentation the relationship of all these factors to the proliferation of the parasite through the shishasta, through the polychaetes. I've often wondered if water quality conditions and the amount of organic material and matter and nutrients, does it have any effect on the dynamics of other, well, maybe not disease, but other organisms that infect fish as well? And will that be part of the scope of the study that you all are working on?
Clayton, that is a great question, but I don't think that I'm the right person to answer that. I'm definitely not a disease expert. The folks on our team, like Julie, that are, would be a better, it'd be a better question for them. We are, but what I can tell you is that those are, we're not including that in the study, because we, with the limited budget we have, are focusing on the annelids, the worms that are the hosts for sea shasta. I don't know if they, I don't know if they host other pathogens. So I'm really the wrong person to ask. I'm sorry.
No, I'm so excited about seeing your study. It sort of links, some of the habitat, and it also relates to flow questions that we need to resolve still with, issues in the upper basin, water use and things like that. It just seems really central to tying all those together. I'm so glad to see traditional knowledge will be incorporated in the study. Really excited about this.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Julie, are you on and have any comments about that question that Clayton brought up?
She had to step off.
Oh,
But
okay.
looks like maybe Jerry has a comment.
Jerry Bartholomew said results from the study would also apply to the control of Parvicapsulum binicormis, a parasite that infects the kidney. So sounds like that'll be helpful.
Thanks.
Great.
That's exactly what I wanted to know.
All right. Well, thank you, Desiree. That was really great, and looking forward to hearing more about that study as it moves forward. There's one more question from Angelina Cook. Do you have estimated seasonal flows after full restoration, or minimum in-stream base flows required to support aquatic biodiversity? I don't know if Desiree, if that's really a question that you're able to answer or not. This is almost more of a regulatory biop type question. You're muted right now, Desiree.
Like I said, I did a gauge analysis, but I don't know. I think the stuff that was in the secretarial determination is probably more robust than what I did. So, yeah, I don't have that, and I'm guessing, but I'm guessing someone else.
Yeah,
May.
it sounds like something that's been modeled and discussed and everything. Hopefully they're able to meet those minimum requirements for the biop. And yeah, tricky. So much when we don't have the ability to actually measure anything until the dams come out. It's a challenging thing. So great. Well, that was a great talk, Desiree. Thank you.